Okay, so now that we've soldered on the joystick and the header pins, look at the bottom here. It's very prickly and not something that you would want to put on your laptop. So we're going to attach a foam bottom to this. You can go with this foam from Michaels. There's this other foam, it's a sticky foam, but beware because it is extremely sticky and will not come off. I happen to have this old laptop case with the squishy foam here, so what I'm going to do is use this material. I'm going to trace this here. Okay, so I have my thread. I'm just going to stitch this together. I like to sew it because I don't want the permanence of the glue option. Now it doesn't have the prickly bottom anymore, and you can put it on your laptop without worrying about it. So we want this joystick somewhere on the keyboard, and so you measure your ribbon wire depending on where you want the Leonardo to sit while you're using your joystick. So if you want the joystick over here, then obviously you're going to need a longer ribbon cable. So just go through and measure what ribbon length you want. Separate these from each other. Just enough to curl the wire around each pin. I don't have wire strippers, so I have to use my box cutter. After you pull the casing off the wire, you twist it so they don't get stuck to each other. And then you put solder on it. So. Little solder on that. And then heat rises. And so let the heat rise up into that and melt the solder. That is a very long stripped wire. So the problem with that is it could make connections, it could touch other wires and then cause a short. So now we want to wrap the wire around each pin and then we will solder it to the pin. This is fairly tricky. There are probably better tools for this that I'm not aware of. I'm going to go ahead and solder down the first one that I got. I think that'll help with getting the rest of them down. One of the others that I had on pretty well is falling off. I'm going to arrange my helping hands to possibly make this a little bit easier. So we've tinned all these wires, and now we want to connect them to the pins on the Leonardo. I'm wrapping my wire around the pin. Tweezers help a lot for this. Okay, So that's one, and then after the VCC, the X and the Y is connected to A1 and A3. The select, which is the button, is connected to A0, and ground is connected to ground. Alright, so hot glue, you have to work very quickly. You can see it's been sitting there and it just So there we have our joystick weighted down. It comes with this cap, which you can just stick on there. But once you put it on there, it's on there forever. So we want to see what output our joystick is producing, so that we can then code it to the shortcuts we want. So I have this code here. You just do void setup serial.begin 9600. Void loop, and then you define here the y-axis and the x-axis. The y-axis you connected to A1, the x-axis to A3, or you would change these if you decided to use different pins, then you just change that there. Okay, so then we serial print x and y with the tab in between. Come up here to the serial monitor to check it out. Okay, so the output of both of them is right around 506, which is roughly in the middle between 0 and 1023, which is the output that you would get with analog signals. So I'm pushing pushing the joystick. So pushing the joystick down shows us 1023 and 506. So the 1023 is our y-axis, and pushing the joystick up gives us 0 and 506. So that obviously the 0 is the one on top. Again, the y-axis. And now going to the left, we have 1023 on the x-axis and 0 on when we go to the right. Okay, so those are just the shortcuts that I coded here, but if you want to play around with it, then you can go diagonal. So that gives you a 0 and a 1023. Or the other diagonal is you can do 0 and 506. You can do, there we go. Yeah, so that one gives you 0, 0. So, and then to the down left gives you 1023 on both axes. Oops. And down right gives you 1023 and 0. So that's if you want even more shortcuts with your joystick, but we're only going to work with 5. Okay, so now that we know what the output of the joystick is, we want to go ahead and code it to our shortcut keys. So first of all, I wrote these variables here just so it would be easier for you to remember what the shortcuts were. So left control is what the Leonardo actually understands, key left CTRL, and the left command is key left GUI. And I just went ahead and wrote variables for that, so I wouldn't have to write in the key left GUI every time I meant left command. Okay, so then we set the pins. Button 1 is connected to A0, and then we do the serial.begin, and we have the X and the Y axes in the loop. So we tell it the Y and the X are analog reads on A1 and A3, and then the button is a digital read, button 1. We set that up earlier up here. Okay, so now if the button is low, okay, so the thing with the button is that you have to do an input pull-up, otherwise it doesn't, it's not stable, it's not a very clear reading what it's doing. So, so you do the input pull-up, and then then when you push it, it actually recognizes it as a change. Okay, so now we're going into the y and the x-axes. So if y-axis is greater than 510, as we saw in the serial monitor here, that they're right around 506 sometimes. I've seen a 508 sometimes, so you just want to make sure that it's not going to accidentally push these keyboard shortcuts, so why not 510, because it's it doesn't take much pushing to get above that anyway. As you see, I'm pushing a little bit and it brings me up to 700. So okay, so if it's above 510 and if the x-axis is above 500 and less than 520, so if it's between 500 and 520, which it's going to be at 506, then keyboard press a tilde, and then delay, because if it doesn't delay, then you'll get a hole way more than you would want to be, or the keyboard won't recognize it as a shortcut, and it won't work. Okay, so as you see, pushing down gives us the Y alert to 1023, and the X stays right around 506 still, 507. So if you wanted to program in some diagonal shortcuts as well, then you can do that without also triggering this shortcut. Okay, so then the same thing with pushing up on the y-axis. Just as long as it's less than 500, the x-axis is between 500 and 535. And then I went ahead and put in the serial.print line, x and y axes with the tab in between, so we can test it. If anything goes wrong, we can look at the serial monitor and see, we can pinpoint where the problem is, if it's with our numbers and our output, and then with our code, or, you know, it's just a good thing to be able to look at that, get some output there.